Hello, everybody. Welcome to everybody here and everybody who is listening to us on the web. We start this event with going back 100 years, over 100, well, almost 100 years. I want to introduce you to Emily Davison. Kate
Willoughby.
Kate Willoughby is Emily Davison, and she will explain who Emily Davison was. And it's a very important character in the history of the fight for civil rights in Britain. Kate. Oh, Emily.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Right. Go down with that? Are we able to with the mic? Can we? Might be better. Have I got a long enough lead? Marvellous. Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Can you hear me at the back on the web? Right, on the live stream. This is for you and for everybody here in the room, but it's very much a story for all of us. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Emily Wilding Davison, and I am a suffragette. I have travelled through time and space to be with you all here today because I bring an important message, a vital and timely message from not just myself, but from my suffrage sisters. Because we know that your voices matter in our democracy. And we are proud to support the new European Citizens Rights Manifesto. This Citizens Rights Manifesto is an important statement, and it also calls for action, not just words. As we, the suffragettes, used to say, deeds, not words. And this is very much a call to action today. We're not just to say warm words, but to actually ensure that positive action is done. Now, our great Votes for Women cause was all about you, future generations, about democracy, equality, and peace. And these remain at the heart of our hopes and our dreams for you. We can no longer stay silent. Apathy and boredom are not your friends. Staying silent only serves those with a very different point of view to yours. So why let their voice be louder than yours? Choosing not to vote or being denied your right to vote puts our powerful legacy at peril. Let me say that as suffragettes and suffragists, we were all humbled by the celebrations in the United Kingdom last year, which celebrated 100 years of the Representation of the People Act, which was passed in 1918. This act gave some women the right to vote. Then, as now, there were only some voices heard in Westminster. And that is why I am here today, standing shoulder to shoulder with our EU sisters and brothers. As we did as suffragettes, we stand with our friends and allies because we are one family. And let me say that, like you, we were not treated as equals. Like you, our voices were ignored. Too many of us were treated as second and third class citizens, denied the right to vote. We feel your pain. It took another 10 years for women to have equal voting rights to men. So they were granted in 1928. And that is why, particularly why I'm here today, to demand that you do not suffer the same. Because your vote is your voice at the ballot box. It is a precious heartbeat that helps to sustain the mother of parliaments. And without it, our democracy cannot truly thrive. So I'm going to hand over to a wonderful young woman and my colleague, Elsa Quist, who is speaking for people today. So this, as I say, I'm passing the baton. So here we are. Elsa.
Oh, should I just stay here? No, I should be heard, shouldn't I? So I can't. Take some. Well, good afternoon, Brussels. Good afternoon, everyone, and anyone online. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Brussels, and everyone online. My name's Elsa, and like the UK, I've been on somewhat of a journey ever since the UK voted to leave the European Union. A journey to find my own voice in all of this Brexit palaver. As EU citizens already living in the UK, we were denied the vote in the referendum, even though the outcome was going to affect us directly. Like many, I wasn't happy with the outcome of the referendum and felt sad at the prospect of Britain leaving this great community of nations that had come together after the Second World War. But it wasn't really until much later than the day after the referendum itself that the rejection and hurt began to set in. Maybe I was naive, but I was waiting for that magical moment when the then Prime Minister Theresa May would stand outside number 10 Downing Street and declare not just that the British people wanted us to stay, but would actually ensure our rights in legislation. After all, the United Kingdom had willingly entered into the European Union and was the partner that had now decided to leave this community of nations. Instead, we became bargaining chips in the divorce negotiations with the EU out here in Brussels. And were caught up in the infighting and shouting match back in the UK. Branded citizens of nowhere and queue jumpers by Theresa May, we were made to apply to stay in the country which we had already made our home. And the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has some form on this as well. Just last Sunday, telling us off, treating the UK like our own home. That's exactly what he told Sky News on the Sophie Rich Sunday programme. So, among the more than 3.6 EU citizens living in the UK are people who have been there for decades, many with British wives or husbands, many with grown-up children, some even retired, who are now required to apply to stay in their own home. It has left many of us feeling confused and questioning our relationship with the UK. After all, like Kate said, actions speak louder than words. So you can see how emotions have been building up as we go about our daily lives in the UK. And for me personally, things really spilled over when I was denied my vote in the EU elections back in May of this year. I was just one of the 1.6 million EU citizens in the UK and Britons abroad who were denied a voice in the EU elections, completely vindicating the demand of the new Europeans for an inquiry into the failures of the UK government in its handling of the EU elections. It was seeing my name crossed out on the electoral register inside my polling station and being told by an electoral officer that I was the wrong category of citizen to vote. It was at that point I reached boiling point, so to speak. And it was at that point I had to speak out. Enough was enough. Since then, I've done a few blogs for the New Europeans website and have been speaking at rallies in Ely and London before coming here to Brussels today. As the mission of New Europeans is to inform and empower us EU citizens. And who knows where things are heading with our new government. And with the prospect of the current government staying in power, with a majority or possibly going into coalition with the Brexit Party, even if Boris is currently ruling that out. And as the New Europeans have pointed out, there are many flaws in the settled status scheme which the government has introduced. There are those who think it's all so simple, just like leaving the EU was meant to be oh so simple. She's been here for some 27 years. Why hasn't she just applied for citizenship? I saw a Brexiteer spout in the comments on their web link to the story my local paper ran after I was denied that vote in the EU elections. But it is a bit more complicated than that, just like most things to do with Brexit. Until 2015, Denmark did not allow dual citizenship, and applying for British citizenship would have meant losing my native Danish citizenship. And as it comes with a price tag of around £1,600, I simply put it on the back burner. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it, was the next response on my social media newsfeed. As if to say I had to choose between my native Danish citizenship and a British passport. Well, I thought that it was exactly what Boris Johnson told us during the Brexit campaign, when he claimed that the UK could have its cake and eat it. My next line to the woman at the other end of my social media feed was, well, I wondered just how many of the 1 million or so Brits living out in Spain would like to give up their British passport. After that, there was no response the other end. You see, the beauty of the European Union was that I never had to make that choice. And it really is a source of shame that the British government did not at least pass a law immediately after the Brexit vote guaranteeing our rights to stay. It didn't really make much difference with Theresa May telling us she wanted us to stay, when the government could not make the time and effort to push through a law in Parliament to secure our rights. Instead, putting our rights on the negotiating table with the EU. At the end of the day, action speaks louder than words. But all of it, unfortunately, didn't end with Theresa May's government. Despite Boris Johnson making similar pledges to his predecessor, he has clearly been too busy negotiating with the EU out here, or his election campaign, to worry about such minor matters. At the end of the day, it's deeds, not words, that matter, as I think our suffragist sisters would agree. So what really would make a profound difference, you might ask? My call for courage to the UK is to reach out to us, all of us EU citizens in the UK and Brits in the EU, and to make us an offer to apply for British citizens. Well, so yeah, that applies to us. Sorry. So to merely reach out to us EU citizens in the UK and offer us nothing less than the opportunity to apply for British citizenship for free once we have secured settled status. EU citizens with settled status can then go on to apply for a British passport on equal footing and at the same cost as other citizens of the UK. After all, we've had 3 years of limbo now, so it could be one way of reaching out. But whether EU citizens apply for a British passport or not, we should never again have our voice denied as permanent residents in the UK. Hence, courage calls for us to demand a vote in the UK elections. And on that point, I'll hand over to Roger.
Roger, you come in now, and yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Elsa. Every time I hear you make that speech, I find it very moving. When Elsa introduced me to Kate, thank you, Kate, for joining us in our campaign for the rights of the 5 million. Thank you. Let's have another round of applause for them. Kate reminded me of what was written on the banner of with the statue of Millicent Fawcett on Parliament Square. Courage calls to courage everywhere, and its voice cannot be denied. And Kate said to me, that rings true, just not everywhere. It rang true internationally at the time, but it resonates through the years, through the decades, and through the century. And it resonates with me today, and I hope it resonates with you and to our audience watching away from here. Because an injustice done to one is an injustice done to all. And as we've heard, like the suffragettes, the 5 million EU citizens, and let's remember the Britons abroad, perhaps 1.6 million Britons abroad, voiceless, treated as second-class citizens, forced to apply for a status which they already have. Not since the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 have we seen the stripping away of millions of people's rights on this scale that we're seeing today. And when we look back to that time, 100 years ago, it's difficult to understand how anybody could have been opposed to giving the franchise to women. It's hard to understand that from today's perspective. And probably nobody cared. And I think nobody really cares about giving rights to EU citizens and Britons abroad today. We obviously care, all of you in this room obviously care, but not enough of us care enough to put it right, and it is an injustice. And it needs action to be taken, and like the suffragettes, EU citizens are organising themselves and finding their voice and standing up and fighting back. And so that's what this manifesto is about. In a way, it's a kind of captures 6 years of work by New Europeans and other organisations and the core demands that we make. But our core demand is a very simple one. People who made life choices before Brexit should have those life choices protected. Citizens should not pay the price of Brexit. So we want, and that's our first pledge, unilateral guarantees for EU citizens in the UK and Britons in the EU, not to be treated as bargaining chips, having their rights traded off one against the other. But we want the British government to move to enshrine the right to stay and all associated rights in primary legislation, not just as they've done now with a statute that can easily be taken away, although we welcome the fact that they've introduced EU settled status unilaterally. That needs to be entrenched now in primary law, and we need the EU to do the same unilaterally for British citizens abroad. And we want a declaratory scheme. That's pledge 2. Why should EU citizens apply for a status which they have already? They should be able to simply say, self-identify and declare that they have made those choices and that they're living in Britain before Brexit, and the same for Britons abroad. And we want a proof of status. That's what our Green Card campaign is about. Joan Pons-LaPlana is a great campaigner who was with us in London when we launched the manifesto, can't be with us today. But he sent me a panicked email the other day. He said, look at this. And it was a screenshot from the Home Office website, which said that the website was down. And he was trying to get proof of his status. He has settled status. But because it's only an online status, in order to prove it in any particular situation, you have to go online. And the Home Office computer was down. Well, supposing he'd been at the border, or supposing he'd been trying to open a bank account, or trying to get a job. And it was those, we all know it, we have it with our online existence. In those few hours, the website was down, and its status is down. What a situation is that? We need a physical proof of status. Our green card would give that, and it would also ring-fence the right to free movement for Britons abroad. And the rights that EU citizens do have to vote in local elections and in the London elections next year, we want those entrenched as well. And as Elsa has said, Elsa's call to courage. EU citizens with settled status should be given citizenship for free. Haven't they been made to suffer enough, this anxiety and this uncertainty over 3.5 years? It's time for the British government to give something back. Not to tell EU citizens, because you want to win an election, that they shouldn't treat the UK like home. What kind of language is that? The British government needs to say to EU citizens, not in a patronising way, we welcome you here. Well, they should be saying that. and they are welcome in Britain, but we will pay for the fact that we have left you in limbo for 3.5 years with all of the emotional and psychological distress that involves. And if you decide to apply for British citizenship, we will give it to you for free. That is Elsa's call to courage today. And we would also like to see all EU citizens in the UK given the right to vote in general elections and the abolition of the 15-year rule for Britons abroad. Because until Britons abroad and EU citizens have the vote, just like women 100 years ago, until they have the vote in the election, until there is a political price to pay, we will continue to have politicians in Britain dog whistling, playing to the gallery, using the vulnerability and the weakness of EU citizens because they don't have the vote to win votes from others. And who knows, in 5 years' time when there's another election, perhaps someone will decide it's advantageous to say, we're going to scrap the settled status scheme, we're going to take those rights away. And unless those rights are entrenched in primary legislation, that will be a very easy thing to do. So we say, we want those rights entrenched in legislation. We want a declaratory scheme. We want a proof of status. We want all our rights to vote as they currently are protected. And we want citizenship for EU citizens, settled status. And we want the right to vote for EU citizens and for Britons abroad. And we say, as Emily Davison did 100 years ago, courage calls to courage everywhere. And its voice cannot be denied. Thank you.
Now, as I mentioned, that I am Emily Wilding Davison, but I also bring word from Dame Millicent Fawcett, who sadly cannot be with us here today, but she does bring a message of hope and encouragement and very much a call to action. As Roger was saying, Dame Millicent's words were about me, Emily Davison, but they actually are much wider, and it's very much something that we can all get involved in. Because even if we think this doesn't affect me, well, it's about realising that we do share far more in common, and that an injustice to one is an injustice to all. So I'll read some words here from Dame Millicent Fawcett, who was with us at the London event, but unfortunately can't be with us here today. And she says, "For the past year, I and my fellow women's suffrage campaigners have looked on with a growing sense of unease as members of Parliament have faced an impossible cacophony of demands." She urges, working together as a team in one common cause is the order of the day. Write, lobby, discuss, and campaign for citizens' rights. And she says that we were, as we were, dismissed, but never deterred. And we did finally achieve those equal voting rights for all in 1928. Stay true to your cause amid the hurly-burly of debate. Think of those who will follow, as we did, and you will find the strength to go on, even when all seems lost. Now, I'd like to bring in a few words that are contemporary, as I feel that they do suit, again, they marry this message from the past to the present, looking to the future. And this is a quotation from the Declaration of Solidarity by EU citizens. This is what we want. This is our voice. A voice of solidarity across the borders. A determination to protect and promote a Europe without borders of any kind. We are one people. We join together in solidarity to sustain peace and democracy now and for our future generations. Thank you.
I think, do you intervene now? Yeah.
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
So I'm Michaela Bunsen. I'm a reader in sociology based at Goldsmiths, and for the last 2.5 years I have been working with British citizens who live in the EU 27, documenting how Brexit is experienced within the context of their lives and the circumstances in which they find themselves. And Roger asked me here today to talk a little bit about that work, and specifically to talk about what British citizens who live across the EU 27 might be saying at this point in time, as a way of kind of amplifying their voices. And I want to start by recalling the words of a friend of mine, somebody who's become a friend over the course of the last 2.5 years. It's Debbie Williams, who is the founder of Brexpat's Hear Our Voice. And we were having a conversation the other week about the work that she had been doing to campaign for citizens' rights. And she said to me, I really feel that we're not being heard still. We still need to amplify our voice and make our government listen to us properly, to know who we are and what we're about. And I want to highlight how important it is to listen to the diverse voices of British citizens who have, like so many EU citizens, moved to go and live and work in other parts of the EU. This is a population that's estimated to be in the region of 1.2 million citizens, and we know that there are problems with those estimations. We know that this is likely to be a significant underestimation of the number of these British citizens. And although Brexit is high stakes for their lives, I think it's true to say that they are a lesser known story about Brexit. We do hear about them a lot less than we hear about EU citizens in the UK, at least from the UK newspapers, from the UK media. So since 2017, my team and I have been working closely with 600 British citizens who live across the EU, exploring what Brexit means to and for them. And we've documented their experiences of Brexit and how it articulates with their sense of themselves as British, as European, and their place in the world. We've tracked its various impacts, its material and emotional impacts particularly for their lives. And we've registered its very uneven outcomes for their lives as they've struggled to live with protracted uncertainty and mitigate Brexit's impact on their lives in their efforts to secure their futures. And what I want to say very simply is that while Britain may not yet have left the European Union, its effects are already being felt in the lives of these Britons. It can be read in how they account for their experience of Brexit as they recall the initial uncertainty about their continued right to stay in the places that they've made their homes and lives, their confusion over what they would need to do to secure their futures, their very real concerns over access to healthcare and social entitlements, the challenges they've faced in demonstrating lawful residence. And for anybody who's particularly interested in this, I've been doing quite a lot of close work with British citizens living in France, which is a country that, like the UK, has not had a system of registration for EU citizens. And this has led to some very uneven outcomes of Brexit for people as they've tried to demonstrate that they are lawfully resident. But it's also, you can also read how this is impacting on their lives when it comes to the judgments that are being made by local government officials over their right to stay, and by people like potential employers who are judging them no longer eligible for the rights of European citizens. And to just put this into some context, I think a notable difference is the extent to which this population really are out of sight and out of mind, at least in the minds of their own government. That's the British government. There are significant restrictions on their ability to engage in the UK's democratic process. Roger's already pointed to the fact that British citizens who live overseas lose the right to vote in Britain after 15 years. And with 2 days to go until general election 2019, many Britons living in the EU 27 whose rights are being transformed through Brexit do not have the right to vote. And yet, the interest of Britons overseas in the general election and in the recent European parliamentary elections, in general election 2017, and indeed the referendum, can be evidenced in the massive surge of registration of overseas voters. And between the 24th of October this year and the 26th of November, so that's the period within which we knew that we were heading to a general election and people could register, 132,048 British citizens abroad who were eligible to vote registered to vote. This is really significant when set within the context that before 2015, the total number of overseas voters registered to vote in the UK had never risen above 35,000. So this latest increase contributes to the broader swelling of registration from voters living overseas that commenced in the lead up to the EU referendum and which had reached record levels of 285,000 at the time of general election 2017. And whether it's by registering to vote by proxy due to lack of trust in the postal vote system, or tactically considering who they should vote for back in the UK, it's very, very clear that this time around, British citizens who live in the EU, who are still eligible to vote, want to make sure that their vote counts and is counted. This political participation is even more poignant in light of Brexit and the concomitant loss of EU citizenship. Once Britain exits the EU, these Britons will lose the right to participate in the European democratic process, from their local elections in the places that they live through to the European parliamentary elections. This is complete disenfranchisement and places further limits on their right to political representation. A lesson within this is precisely that the restrictions on their political participation in the UK, paired with a lack of dedicated political representation for Britain's overseas citizens, has led to limited attention and understanding by UK politicians of what Brexit means variously for their lives. And I would go one step further and say that the UK government really have no idea who the British citizens are who live abroad, whether that's in terms of the actual numbers or whether that's in terms of understanding them in their multiplicity. And while keeping European citizenship, as is advocated by this manifesto, will not resolve all of the challenges that Brexit places on their abilities to live their lives as before, at least this will mean that they will continue to have a say in the future of European politics and democracy.
Okay, the last word now to Emily, and then a few questions that there may be questions from the colleagues, journalists here.
So I think we've all, it's very sobering, some of the facts and figures that we've been hearing and the injustices. So thinking back to my journey as a suffragette, I'll just tell you a little bit and about, again, why we're calling out to everybody today to be championing civil rights for the 5 million. So to be a suffragette takes courage. The prize of equality is our pearl. We are feminists, and our noble struggle is for generations yet unborn. The powers that be may shame us, shun us, and question our sanity. But we will never give in, no matter the cost, onwards to victory. And that is why courage from the past calls for courage today. Democracy needs you. Your vote is powerful and fragile. Please use your vote. And for democracy's sake, we must banish judgment. Remain humble. Dare to listen, even as your anger swells. For we share far more in common than that which divides us with those who doubt our cause. Because faith in the nation is not ours alone. You may be despised, ridiculed, excluded, as we were. Yet, I promise, you will find friendship, solidarity, and hope. Let facts be your arrows and compassion your armour. Do not sway from your path. Do not lower your eyes. Keep on, step by step, moving forward, story by story. Listen and speak from the heart. Statues are magnificent, but democracy is gloriously alive. We have history on our side. Ordinary women, brave women, extraordinary women. Believe in you. Future generations to have those rights that were denied to us. We did not shrug our shoulders in the face of self-interest, misogyny, or social injustice. No. We worked shoulder to shoulder in solidarity across borders and the oceans wide. Sisters moving forwards together with our friends and allies by our sides. Now it is your turn, and time is pressing. When future generations ask how you honoured my brave suffrage sisters in this momentous year, make sure you can say that you champion the cause of democracy, equality, and peace. Your voices in our democracy matter. And in these difficult times, I urge you all to turn away from manufactured division and instead reach out with respect. Remember us, the suffragettes and the suffragists. Remember us, and remember all who are denied their vote today. And keep on campaigning and speaking up. In the United Kingdom, we have a general election in a few days. Please think of us and those who do not have the right to vote on the 12th of December, be they too young, be they EU citizens in the UK, or UK citizens who live in the EU for over 15 years. Please, your vote is vital, and it is a hard-won right. Our victories were modest. Yours will be great. For courage calls to courage everywhere, and its voice cannot be denied. Thank you.
That's good. So this was a big appeal. I don't know if there are any questions from some colleagues who want to ask questions. Maybe you want some clarifications, or if everything is clear, if you want more details. Just let. Now is the time to ask questions.
Okay.
Just for recording, I think we can
well, thank you very much for this very passionate appeal.
Can you say who they are?
Yeah.
Maria-Laura?
Okay.
Can you say who the people say who they are?
Yes, my name is Moussa Apolot from the Brussels Times. And we've been writing quite a lot about Brexit and also about, British citizens here in the EU, and what you think about it, and how difficult it was to apply for citizenship, for example, here in Belgium, but also other way around in UK. I was now a bit surprised that these issues about citizens' rights have not been resolved in the negotiations between UK and the EU, because I thought that was the first issue which both parties tried to solve. At least we were promised that. And then the other issue, the main issue was, as you know, the Irish border and backstop. And now we hear that still many things remain to be done and so on. So I would like to ask, what did the negotiators miss, I mean, in trying to told us to protect the rights of citizens, both British citizens here in EU countries and the other way around.
Any other question, David? You have a question? If you have a question, come here, please, because it won't be recorded. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, my name's David Price. I write Schumann.info on the original democracy and your democracy column. What I would like to ask you about is the human rights side, because originally all the treaties had to pass by Strasbourg, had to have a debate in the Assembly. And at the moment we've got treaties which have not even been discussed properly in Strasbourg, the Assembly of Council of Europe, which is responsible for the Convention of Human Rights. What's being violated at the moment are human rights of people, because we have treaties which are badly written, and we have rights which are being not respected. And I mean, I've written a book which is available free, which is called Don't Brexit, Fix It. So these human rights should be inside the treaties we have now. And what I would like to see is how a group like yours could actually activate the original concept, which is based on human rights, the human European values we call it, but the human rights about the respect of people and the governments not running over individual rights.
Let's see. Start with Michaela first.
Thank you very much for the question about citizens' rights and what's gone wrong with the negotiations. And I think that there's a litany of issues, and I think that the first starting point was exactly in deciding that this would be bilateral. I think that was a really important starting point, and of course that speaks to pledge number 1 very, very clearly. And I think the second point was that citizens' rights became heavily restricted, and to a kind of focus on what happens when you remove freedom of movement, which is obviously, is in the directives as a citizens' rights issue. But this also means that any of the issues around the legal structuring of freedom of movement and the exclusions that were embedded in that are then also reproduced through the citizens' rights negotiations. And there are a whole host of citizens who rely on EU treaty rights, who may not be EU citizens, who are finding themselves excluded from those discussions as well. It includes things like the Zambrane families, who are families where the children are EU citizens and the parents are not, but whose rights rest on the rights of these children as EU citizens who may be having their rights removed. So I think that there is a whole load of kind of areas which actually, right from the get-go, the way the negotiations were framed, meant that would never be resolved. And I think that that's what we're starting to see now. And we're starting to see what happens when the case of France is really interesting, because what's happening is people are being judged along ideas of what it means to be lawfully resident in another EU country as an EU citizen. And people are at that point being found to fall short of that. And this is a particular interpretation of the kind of the criteria that go alongside freedom of movement. And it didn't have to be that way, because it could have gone towards a kind of a more fundamental rights-oriented approach in law, rather than this quite rigid reading, I think, of freedom of movement legislation.
So the first question was what was wrong with doing this through negotiations. The first thing that was wrong with doing this through negotiations is that the two situations are not symmetrical. EU citizens in the UK will still be EU citizens after Brexit, but British citizens will no longer be EU citizens after Brexit. They will lose all their EU citizenship rights especially the right to free movement, which the European Parliament pledged on the 17th of December in a resolution 2017 not to sign off the withdrawal agreement until a way had been found. And we believe our green card is a way to do that, to give EU Britain's a green card, to give them the right to freedom of movement. So far nobody's come up with any other idea. If they do, we'd be very happy to hear it and support it if it's better than this. We want those free movement rights back. So there's that asymmetry. Secondly, the whole approach to it was to level down rights. You don't negotiate rights down. If you're going to have a negotiation about rights, you negotiate rights up. You don't put people in a Sophie's choice situation where you say, okay, tell us which rights you want to keep and which ones you want to give up. You keep all the rights. If you want to negotiate, you negotiate about levelling up, not levelling down. Thirdly, third thing wrong with the negotiations is that, well, they shouldn't have entered into it in the first place because it's treating people like bargaining chips. EU citizens don't have a voice. They become objects in the negotiation. What was the negotiation actually about? There was a negotiation, but what was it actually about? It wasn't about a trade-off between the rights of Britons abroad and EU citizens in the UK. What was going on was the British government was holding 3.6 million EU citizens hostage to the negotiations, because instead of having a divorce bill, we had figures bandied about at the start of the negotiations of 70, 80 billion, which is now down to under 40 billion, 39. Once they got it down under 40, they let go. They put that card down. They said, you know what? We're going to give settled status unilaterally. Negotiation wasn't a negotiation between the rights of Britain. There was 3.4 million EU citizens being held hostage to try and get the divorce bill down. And remember what Liam Fox said in 2017. We can't guarantee unilaterally the rights of EU citizens because it's the only card we've got in our hand. And that was quite right. He was quite realistic about that. What a disgraceful thing to have happened. What a shameful thing to have happened. And it's a pity that the EU went down the track of negotiations, but maybe they felt they didn't have any choice. The next thing that was wrong was what I said before. Nobody cares. If you have negotiations, what is the objective? We've had, over the years, we haven't got involved in negotiations because we've called from day one for unilateral guarantees. But we know, through our contact with Barnier's team, that they were waiting for David Davis and then Rob and other people to turn up in the negotiations and say, you know what, Mr. Barnier, we want you to protect the rights of Britons abroad. And if you do that, we will do this for you. They were waiting for that conversation to take place. It never happened. The only reason that we have any protection for Britons at all in negotiation is because Mr. Barnier and the EU said, don't you want to ask us for this? They were prompted by, they said nothing because they don't care. So the whole thing was completely wrong. What we need is the approach that David said about at the end. We need a human rights approach. And we look to the European Union and specifically to the European Parliament to do that because we are Europeans. We are Europeans, and the European Union has got to be a safe space for human rights. It prides itself on that. It wants to project itself in that. It should do that. I thought Britain used to do that. I thought that was what Britain was about. That's why so many people came to Britain. Not today. If you're not from Britain today, don't come here and treat Britain as your home. We've been home this week. But the European Union is supposed to be a space that protects human rights. So we need that, and it is in the treaties, and they're not doing it. And we must call for that. We must call for that, and that must be our call for courage. And I can do that until I'm blue in the face, and others, and politicians, and others in the European Parliament have been doing that. But we need to hear the voices of EU citizens themselves. We need to empower. That's the lesson from the suffragettes. That's why I want to draw attention to these wonderful displays that we have that Michaela has brought from the Search Project, the quotes from British people, hear their voices, Britons in the EU today, the wonderful images and quotes we have that were made on International Women's Day by Isabella Infantis, that we also have here with us today and are in the manifesto. We need to hear those voices. We need to empower those voices. People need to have the vote, and we need to call for this, because this is a shameful issue, shameful episode in British history. And the EU could have done better, and it should do better, and will do better. And that's why we need our courage calls today.
Okay, well, I think if there are no other questions, David?
Could I I'll just add one thing. I put in my book three.
You should come here because of we are recording this.
I put in my book 3 different cases which can be brought to the Court of Justice, generally speaking, either in England or in Luxembourg or in Strasbourg. One is basically quite simple, relates to something which may be obscure, but is the fact that there are 2 different treaties. One's called the Treaty of Lisbon, the other's called Euratom Treaty. Euratom was never on the referendum. So the United Kingdom decided that they would leave Euratom, which is good for medicines and various other things. So how can a government decide to leave a community without a referendum on it is basically the question. It's a very good legal question. There was no statement, no publication, no ministerial statement, and nothing up till the election. And then there's other ones which relate to referendums. There's a lot of questions which are basically fundamental human rights questions.
So this can be a case of reporting Britain to the Court of Justice. I don't know, Michela. No. Okay.
Look, thank you very much indeed for what you've said, and it gives me the opportunity also to put on record my thanks to some of our partners over the last 6 years in this campaign, from New Europeans, Professor Dimitris Giannopoulos from Knowing Our Rights, and who's now the chair of law at Goldsmiths Law School, the chair of our New Europeans in the UK, who's Associate Professor of International Refugee Law, Dr. Ruvi Ziegler at the University of Reading, Professor Brad Blitz, and others, who've been working with us as we try to, and a number of very active, prominent MEPs in the European Parliament, Claude Moraes in particular, Julie Ward, Danuta Hübner has been very, very helpful and supportive. We have been trying over a number of years to reframe this issue of the post-Brexit rights of citizens as a human rights issue. We believe this is a human rights issue, as you do. Why do we say that? Because, for 2 reasons. Because, see, the rights we have as EU citizens as such are not human rights, but to take people's rights away without their consent, and let's remember EU citizens did not have the vote in the referendum. We tried to get them to vote. We worked with Mike Gapes and Tom Brake and other MPs who had an amendment tabled. When the referendum bill went through, it was voted down. So it's not that nobody thought of it, they voted it down. So they didn't have a voice, and their rights were taken away without their consent. And we believe that the removal of those rights, the stripping of those rights, is a human rights issue. And we also believe that to leave 3.5 million people, well, actually 5 million people, to leave the 5 million in a state of limbo, in a state of uncertainty, with all the psychological and emotional distress that causes, to the point that we are collaborating with psychologists to try to find a way of offering support to people who are suffering breakdowns and psychological distress as a result of the uncertainty and the anxiety that's caused. We also believe that that is a human rights issue. But we need to have an individual case, somebody who will actually bring an individual case, having left this in limbo for so long. And it's quite difficult to find somebody who's prepared to come forward and actually have the courage to do as Elsa and others are now doing, and the voices that you hear around the room, to speak up. Because we need to hear those voices. We need people to come forward. We need people to have courage. And that's why we call our manifesto Courage Calls. A Citizens Rights Manifesto for the 5 million. And what we hope is that it will get lots of other EU citizens and Britons abroad speaking up, having the courage to make their voices heard, because that's what we take from the suffragettes. Speeches by me are not going to change that, or other politicians. But if we hear the voices of Britons abroad and EU citizens themselves, then things can start to change. But we do believe it's a human rights issue, and we're very keen to reframe this issue as a human rights issue, which we believe it is.
I think unless you have do you have a last encouragement, or I don't know if you want to say something else. Otherwise, we would close the session.
Well, I just say that it's very appropriate that you should have raised that, because we've deliberately had this press conference today and launched our manifesto today because it is UN Human Rights Day, and that's why we've chosen today to launch our manifesto. We have copies at the front for members of the press and others who'd like it take away. It's also now live on our website on the event listing for today. If you go on to neweuropeans.net, what's on, and look at the event listing for today, press conference launch of Courage Calls, Citizens Rights Manifesto for the 5 million. You can see on the second line down, read the manifesto, you can click there, you can see the whole manifesto printed online. And it is Human Rights Day, this is a human rights issue, and we salute all those Britons abroad and EU citizens who, like the suffragettes, have had the courage to come forward and make their voices heard. We want to inform, we want to empower them, and we want to see the change that is needed so that their rights can be secured. Thank you very much.
So if you want to say something else, I think you've been speaking, saying, enough words. So I think we close this, and whoever is going to vote, please vote well. And if you are voting, if you are not denied your vote, and we will meet again over the web and or in the press club whenever you want to come. There will be more events here because I think this is a kind of it's a place that attracts people to discuss and debate. And good luck to us all. Okay, thank you very much.